On July 10, 2004, the Lasswell family was living what appeared to be a typical life in a modest home located near 23rd Avenue and Thomas Road in Phoenix, Arizona. Their neighborhood was like many others in the city, quiet, unremarkable, and above all, safe. It was the kind of place where families felt secure, where children could play outside, and where neighbors knew and greeted one another. But the events that unfolded on that warm summer evening would shatter this sense of security, casting a dark shadow over the area and leaving an indelible mark on all who knew Elena Lasswell. Elena, at just 15 years old, was in many ways the embodiment of youthful potential. She was a bright, vivacious teenager with a wide circle of friends and a family that adored her. Elena had her whole life ahead of her, a life filled with dreams, aspirations, and the promise of a bright future. She was known for her kindness, her intelligence, and her ability to bring joy to those around her. In many ways, she was an ordinary girl with extraordinary potential, and her presence was a source of pride and happiness for her family and friends. But all of that would be violently taken from her in a senseless act of brutality. On the evening of July 10th, just after 8 p.m., the Phoenix Police Department received an emergency call that would lead officers to the Lasswell residence. The details of the call were immediately alarming, prompting a rapid response. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for years to come, a scene of unimaginable horror that no amount of training could have fully prepared them for. Inside Elena's bedroom, officers found the young girl lying unresponsive. The room, which had once been a place of safety and comfort, was now a crime scene. Despite the frantic efforts of emergency personnel to save her, it was clear that Elena had suffered severe injuries. The medical team worked desperately, but their efforts were in vain. Elena was pronounced dead at the scene. Following that, a comprehensive investigation was launched by the Phoenix Police Department. As they began to piece together what had happened, the full horror of the crime became apparent. Elena had been subjected to a brutal assault before her life was cruelly cut short. The details were both shocking and deeply disturbing. She had been physically beaten and assaulted in what was supposed to be the sanctity of her own home, a place where she should have been safe from harm. The violence of the attack was staggering, and it was clear that whoever was responsible had acted with extreme malice and brutality. The initial investigation into Elena Lasswell's tragic death was marked by a sense of urgency. From the moment officers arrived at the Lasswell residence on the night of July 10, 2004, it was clear that this case would be anything but straightforward. The crime scene was meticulously processed, with investigators collecting every piece of physical evidence they could find. They combed through Elena's bedroom, carefully bagging and tagging items that might hold clues, fibers, fingerprints, any trace of DNA that could point to the person responsible for the horrific crime. In the days following Elena's death, the Phoenix Police Department intensified their efforts, canvassing the surrounding neighborhood in the hope of finding witnesses who might have seen or heard something unusual that night. Detectives knocked on doors, questioned residents, and pieced together a timeline of events leading up to the murder. Despite these exhaustive efforts, however, they encountered a significant obstacle: the lack of direct witnesses or solid leads. No one had seen anyone enter or leave the Lasswell home around the time of the murder, and no suspicious activity had been reported in the area that evening. Recognizing the challenges they faced, the investigators called upon the community for help through Silent Witness, a program that encouraged citizens to provide anonymous tips that might help solve the case. This program had been successful in previous investigations, and detectives hoped it would yield new information in Elena's case. Flyers were distributed, and local media coverage urged anyone with information, no matter how seemingly insignificant, to come forward. Despite these efforts, The response was dishearteningly sparse. The community was deeply shaken by the murder, but the fear and uncertainty surrounding the case seemed to stifle any leads. In their pursuit of justice, the detectives delved into Elena's life, searching for any possible motive that could explain such a brutal crime. They conducted extensive interviews with her family, friends, and acquaintances, scrutinizing her social circles and daily routines. They explored every aspect of her life, from her relationships and friendships to her school activities and hobbies, looking for any clue that might reveal why someone would target her. The brutality of the crime suggested that the perpetrator might have been driven by a deeply personal motive, or was someone with a disturbed psyche. However, this line of investigation proved to be equally frustrating. Elena had no known enemies, and there were no apparent conflicts in her life that could explain the violence that had been inflicted upon her. As the days stretched into weeks and then into months, the case began to lose momentum. The initial flurry of investigative activity gradually slowed as leads dried up and new information became scarce. The media, which had initially covered the case extensively, began to turn its attention to other stories, and Elena's murder started to fade from public consciousness. For the detectives who had worked tirelessly to solve the case, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Despite their best efforts, they were no closer to identifying the killer, and the case seemed to be slipping away. In 2004, forensic technology was not as advanced as it is today. DNA analysis was available, but it was more time-consuming and less conclusive than modern methods. The evidence collected at the scene, including any potential DNA, was stored and occasionally revisited as new techniques became available. However, without a match in the database, the evidence alone could not identify a suspect. By 2012, the case had officially gone cold. The Phoenix Police Department, acknowledging the lack of progress, moved the case into their cold case unit. This specialized team was tasked with revisiting old, unsolved cases, using new technology and fresh perspectives to find leads that might have been missed during the initial investigation. For Elena's family, this was a small glimmer of hope, but after years of waiting, they had little faith that the case would ever be solved. The cold case designation felt like another injustice, a reminder that the system had failed to protect Elena and to deliver justice on her behalf. It was a dark period for everyone involved, but unbeknownst to them, the tide was slowly beginning to turn. The turning point in the investigation came nearly 8 years after her death, when the cold case detectives revisited the evidence from Elena's case, which included biological samples that had been carefully preserved since the night of the crime. These samples were re-examined using the latest DNA testing methods, which were far more sensitive and accurate than those available at the time of the original investigation. The forensic team was able to extract a DNA profile from the evidence that was collected at the scene. This profile was run through national and state DNA databases, which are repositories for DNA profiles collected from convicted offenders, arrestees, and other individuals. This time, the results yielded a match, a breakthrough that had eluded investigators for years. The DNA profile matched that of Sergio Reyes, a name that had not previously come up during the investigation. At the time of the incident, Reyes was only 17 years old, living in the same area as Elena. Despite being in close proximity, he had no known connection to Elena or her family, which likely explains why he had not been considered a suspect during the initial investigation. His ability to blend into the community without drawing suspicion had allowed him to escape scrutiny for years. As detectives dug deeper into Reyes's background, they uncovered a disturbing history. Although he was only a teenager at the time of Elena's murder, Reyes had already exhibited violent tendencies and had a criminal record. However, none of his prior offenses had connected him directly to a crime as horrific as the one that claimed Elena's life. This revelation was both shocking and tragic. Reyes had been living in the community all along, yet his involvement in Elena's death had gone undetected. The new DNA evidence was compelling enough to reopen the case formally. In March 2013, additional DNA testing was conducted to confirm the match, solidifying the case against Reyes. With this confirmation, detectives were able to move forward, and Reyes was identified as the primary suspect in the murder of Elena Lasswell. Armed with this new evidence, the Phoenix Police Department meticulously compiled a comprehensive case against Reyes, which was then presented to a Maricopa County grand jury. The evidence was compelling, and in 2014, the grand jury handed down an indictment against Reyes on multiple serious charges, including first-degree murder, sexual assault, kidnapping, and burglary, all directly linked to the horrific events of that fateful night in 2004. However, securing the indictment was only the beginning of what would prove to be a long and arduous process. By the time the indictment was issued, Reyes had already fled the country, escaping to Mexico and effectively placing himself beyond the immediate reach of U.S. law enforcement. His flight presented a significant obstacle, complicating efforts to bring him back to Arizona to face the charges against him. Extraditing a suspect from another country, particularly in a case involving such severe charges, is never a straightforward task. It requires a complex interplay of legal protocols, diplomatic negotiations, and the cooperation of multiple law enforcement agencies across international borders. The U.S. Marshal Service, alongside Mexican authorities, took on the challenging task of locating Reyes and initiating the extradition process. This effort involved extensive surveillance, intelligence gathering, and legal maneuvering to confirm Reyes's location and ensure that the legal groundwork was in place for his extradition. Despite their best efforts, Reyes managed to evade capture for several years, and the case appeared to stall once more, much to the frustration of those who had worked so hard to secure the indictment. Yet, the determination and persistence of the Phoenix Police Department's cold case unit, combined with the relentless efforts of the U.S. Marshals, eventually bore fruit. After years of searching and negotiating, Reyes was finally located in Mexico. The subsequent legal battle to secure his extradition was lengthy and complex, involving careful coordination between U.S. and Mexican legal systems. But after overcoming numerous legal hurdles, Reyes was arrested and taken into custody. The final chapter of this long pursuit unfolded on July 10, 2024, exactly 20 years to the day after Elena Lasswell's life was tragically cut short. On this poignant anniversary, Reyes was successfully extradited back to the United States, marking a significant milestone in the case that had haunted the Phoenix community for 2 decades. Upon his return to Arizona, Reyes was immediately booked into Maricopa County Jail, where he faced the full weight of the charges against him. His return marked a significant milestone in a case that had haunted the Phoenix community for 2 decades. Reyes's arrest was a moment of profound relief for Elena's family, who had waited so long for justice, and for the detectives who had never given up on solving her case. Reyes was held on a $1.5 million bond, underscoring the seriousness of the charges and the high flight risk he posed. His extradition and subsequent arrest were hailed as a triumph of persistence and collaboration among various law enforcement agencies, finally closing a painful chapter in the long-running case of Elena Lasswell. The legal proceedings against Reyes were set to continue, with his first court appearance scheduled for July 17, 2024, shortly after his return to Arizona, where he was expected to enter a plea in response to the charges. As of August 2024, the case continues to progress through the legal system. The prosecution is focused on ensuring that the evidence against Reyes is presented clearly and convincingly, while the defense is expected to challenge the methods used to collect and process the DNA evidence, as well as any other aspects of the investigation that might cast doubt on Reyes's guilt. Nevertheless, for the Lasswell family and the community that had supported them, this was a critical step toward achieving the justice that had been denied for so long. While the arrest could never undo the tragedy of Elena's death, it did provide a measure of closure and the hope that, at last, the person responsible would be held accountable for his actions. As for the trial's outcome, it will be closely monitored, and further updates are expected as the legal process continues. What do you think will happen during the trial? Will the evidence hold up in court, or could there be unexpected twists? Stay tuned for the latest updates on the case and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe justice will finally be served for Elena Lasswell? Your insights could spark an important conversation about this long-awaited trial. Also, if you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, as we upload the most interesting and fresh cold cases every second day, so make sure you're here for all the latest content. Your support helps us continue bringing you detailed coverage on these critical stories.